Hello class, welcome to week 14. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and we're almost done with this semester, but we are going to be ending it not with a whimper but a bang. We are covering really two topics that still have not been fully resolved for our country. The Civil War, and then what happens after the Civil War, the Reconstruction. I had a mentor called it the counter-revolution. I'll address that idea and why he said that, and various ways to look at post-Civil War. Sorry. Like I said, I addressed some of these things in my lecture, in the lectures, but I really want to clarify something. The Civil War, there is still such a debate about what the Civil War was about. And so much so that I'll tell you this story. I was re-listening to my lectures and I don't think I mentioned this. So if I'm repeating a story, then forgive me. But, in any case, I had this friend who said to me, I don't believe in oversimplifications, and I'm doubtful of these kind of majority popular views. And I did some research on the internet, and the Civil War was not about slavery. There's not going to be a whole Civil War over one thing like slavery. No, it was something else. And so he tells me it's about states' rights, but economics, and about tariffs in particular. Tariffs, an issue over tariffs. So he plays for me this very long YouTube that's based off of a podcast. And this young intellectual makes this kind of strong case for the Civil War not being over slavery. Now, I knew this was wrong, and there was various reasons I already knew that this information was problematic. But I felt, like I should address it. I should research more. Then I watched another hour-long lecture arguing the same thing about tariffs from a man with a PhD in economics who was a libertarian. And there were several libertarians that were making the argument that the Civil War was not about slavery. And then I watched another one. And then I did some more research. And I discovered how grotesque a distortion of history this really is. And before I say anything further, I like to always kind of mention that to me the issue isn't about demonizing the South and glorifying the North. And this is something that I will talk about again and again, and especially next week. That racism was, you could argue, the same on both sides. But the institution of slavery was particular to Southern elites. And the information I didn't have before was something that we can settle very fast, and you're going to settle it yourself. You're going to see that anytime there's a debate about what the Civil War was over, the Southern states said why they were seceding. Okay? And they wrote it in their declarations of secession. So just like when we strove to be independent of the British, and we wrote a Declaration of Independence, right? The Southern states are basically, their declarations of secession are basically their declarations of independence. And they say why they're leaving. Just read the first few paragraphs, some by the second paragraph, of all of the seceding states. From now on, when there's a debate about the Civil War, you should only have to Google declarations of secession and give that to somebody, and that should be really the final straw. But we do more than just that for this class. Of course, we do an actual historical discussion of that. And there's a professor. I'm trying to figure if he's from Princeton or Yale, but I have a lecture from him who's an expert on U.S. history, and he does an interesting further discussion of this issue. And then what I also incorporated into our discussion was, or what I'm putting in is the role of Native Americans / American Indians in the U.S. Civil War. And so what I'm hoping here is this to blow your mind, right? And I'm also incorporating Karl Marx. Now you might wonder, why am I making Karl Marx such a part of this discussion? Well, I'm a child of the Cold War. And Karl Marx was seen as the most quintessential anti-American philosopher that you could think of, because he is the backbone of all communist states. Karl Marx is where we get Marxism. He had an idea called communism. Communism was the ideology of the Soviet Union. It's still officially, although not in actuality, the ideology of China. It was the foundation of Cuba and North Korea even. North Korea's changed officially. That's a whole other topic. But what's interesting is a lot of people don't know is that he was alive during the U.S. Civil War, and that Karl Marx wrote a lot about the United States during the Civil War, and he wrote a lot about the Civil War. I have a very thick book. I should have pulled it up to show you, but I didn't grab it, and I'm not going to take any more time on this for that now. Karl Marx wrote a lot on the U.S. Civil War, and he was pro-North and pro-Abraham Lincoln. So you have this strange irony of history that that a man who is going to be the ideological foundation for what the U.S. would fight against so much of the modern 20th century was actually a fan of the United States in many ways and pro-Abraham Lincoln while he was alive. So I just thought you would find that interesting. And you'd also find interesting that his arguments, he also takes on, if you notice, the debate about what the Civil War was about. Okay? So that was a debate taking place back then. And the last thing I'm going to say on this is it was popular in Britain to be against slavery because anti-slavery was what was being used to really justify colonizing Africa to stop slavery, but in reality colonize Africa more thoroughly. That's a whole other topic. But the trend of all political stripes and of religion in the UK was to be anti-slavery. And European investors who wanted to support the South had to find a way to justify supporting them, and the tariff the mention of tariffs being the issue was conjured up in the UK as a way to tell people there, okay, it's not about slavery. And they made their argument for that. And then Karl Marx basically took them to task on why that was propaganda, basically. And so the debate still rages now. By the way, in my lifetime, the last Civil War bride died. Somebody who was married to a Civil War veteran. So we're talking, and that's very complicated. She was very, very young, marrying a very, very old man, and that's a whole other topic right there. But the fact that that was even possible shows you how recent this was. So just wrap your mind around that, and wrap your mind around how much this the things that I'm showing you right here are not a part of popular discourse. And I'll leave it at that. And I hope you have a good and interesting week.